Fooly Cooly is often regarded as one of the best anime ever made. Its flashy, in-your-face visual style, fourth wall breaking, and abstract storytelling deliver such an emotional impact that it is anything short of iconic. Fooly Cooly also has one of the most kick-ass soundtracks by the Japanese alt-rock band The Pillows, which is another great plus. And really, each episode just kind of feels like an extended music video for that band, in my mind. Fooly Cooly just captures being an adolescent in the 2000s perfectly, which is why it is as legendary as it is, and has become a staple of Adult Swim's anime programming in the 2000s. Yet very few people today talk about its sequels, despite 2 coming out as recently as 2023. Like, seriously, I may not be as involved with much of the happenings of the anime world right now, but I'm in shock that the last 2 shows completely came to be as forgotten as they are. I mean, thinking about it, the original sequels that came out in 2018, their first trailer has over 2 million views on YouTube. So that begs the question, where did everyone go? So today, I'm gonna sit down and watch them. In doing so, I hope to figure out why these shows lack the widespread recognition of the original show, and why did they even happen?
Come back to life!
Oh boy, come on. I can't wait for the Gentle Giant references to come down on me. Will there be any end to the Vandergraaf generator name drops? Seriously? Yes, I'm starting with Progressive, and it has nothing to do with either of those bands, by the way. I know that Crunchyroll says Alternative is season 1 of the first series of reboots, but Progressive came out first, so I'm gonna talk about Progressive first. I'll excuse this error once, because the naming scheme makes it a little confusing, even for me, but if this was the only problem I'd have with Crunchyroll, I'd actually enjoy the service and its clunky UI. Before I completely ruin my potential to get a Crunchyroll sponsorship, I'll get back to the show. Now, Fooly Cooly Progressive. I think the best way to sum it up is with a resounding meh. It's not awful, but it's also not that memorable either. It feels like it's attempting to recapture that same lightning in a bottle the original had and repackage it in a new bottle. It has some of it, I'll give it that. It goes for that same kind of spontaneity, but completely misses the point of it. The concepts are interesting, or could be interesting, but the way it's fleshed out is completely flat. Speaking of completely flat, the animation is just not on the same level as the previous show. It's just nowhere near as expressive and unpredictable. Even the plot is generally less strong than the original. The feeling that each episode of the original Fooly Cooly brought out was strong in the viewer, but here, not so much. Fooly Cooly Progressive follows the relationship between the timid Hidomi and the geeky Ko as they grow, learn more about each other, and how they get stuck in the crossfire between Haruko and Julia's battle. One of the things that bothers me about this setup is that somehow, in spite of how these 2 narratives are interlinked, they feel completely disconnected, which really makes me feel apathetic to these characters. I mean, it's not that they don't have anything going on. The whole point of Haruko searching for someone is a good plot point, and her using the main characters in a similar way to how she used Naota in Fooly Cooly is a good underpinning to her character, but I feel like there's not enough of that to make up for the rest. The relationship with Hidomi and Ko feels like it could use some teeth as well. The only thing that seems to unify them and give them any interesting chemistry is the fact that they have to put up with Haruko's nonsense. It really doesn't need a conventional narrative to tell its story. The original works off these episodic slice-of-life stories that become incredibly fantastical over the course of a 20-minute run, that often resolve themselves over the course of 20 minutes, striking at the heart of issues that affect the melancholic, aimless adolescent, one who's trying to figure themselves out through the changes of youth and the relationships that shape it. The new show does something similar with Hidomi and Ko's relationship, but not to the same effect. Hidomi being the one who's trying to figure themselves out, we kind of get glimpses of her dreams in the opening sequences of each episode before the episode's actual plot begins, and kind of makes it feel like the dreams foreshadow something, but they kind of don't. They express this feeling that she's trying to open up herself and to deal with these things in her life through that abstract imagery, I think. I could be interpreting this wrong, and I feel like there's a message there, but the feeling behind it is just muddled. That is in large part due to the animation, which, for my money, doesn't look bad, but does not evoke the strong feeling I got out of watching the original again. For the most part, it looks like a run-of-the-mill anime from the 2010s, especially with the fight scenes that lack weight or power to make them impactful. And even like the brief moments of melancholy, like I was mentioning before, aren't there in the presentation of the show. The closest it gets is with the 5th episode, where the art style unpredictably shifts. And if I'm honest, I like that art style. I love the looseness it has, and I think it is actually kind of expressive. Although it's not as harsh or fluid as something you might see from someone like Masaki Yuasa, it still is interesting. I don't know, it just looks more interesting than the style they were doing in the other episodes. So I'm just trying to cut some slack here. I like that they did that, okay? And as a whole, I think that episode 5 is probably the best episode of that whole show. It even does the whole manga storyboarding gag from the original. Isn't that neat? That was something. The setup that happens in that episode for the finale is probably the most engaging the show actually gets. More so than the finale itself, because it kind of gives an okay send-off to these characters, wrapping up their storyline in a way that's satisfying, but really it just lacks the emotional gratification of the overall story for me to consider it memorable. And that's how I feel about this show in general. It does an okay job for what it wants to do in 6 episodes, but it has nothing super striking in it. This is pretty much apparent in every single element of the show, from the presentation, the characters, and even the story they go through. It just gives you nothing to grab onto. The music is nice, at least. They still got the pillows to do the music, so that's always a plus. Everything else is just, FLCL Progressive is fine, but entirely unnecessary. It's not bad. Again, it's at least watchable. So what about Alternative? Alternative quickly follows up Progressive, airing 2 months after Progressive's original run on Adult Swim. While they are often lumped together, both of these shows take drastically different approaches to telling their stories. It improves upon Progressive's animation, adding much needed flair, but the story is pretty middling and the animation is pretty on par for the course. But again, still an improvement over what was in Progressive. The story is also quite different from Progressive. While Progressive was a romance coming-of-age anime, Alternative is more in line with high school slice-of-life anime, focusing less on romantic relationships and more about friendships and their power of magic. Literally. Oftentimes, the abilities pulled from our main character Kana manifest as a result of her inner turmoil with her friends, pretty much in the same way as it worked in all the other series. The story follows a group of high school girls as they live their aimless lives, which is fiercely interrupted by Haruko again, just like it was in Progressive. Also, like Progressive, it seems like they wanted to lean more into the plot and more into direct storytelling, to some pretty mixed results. I mean, I do like the plot lines here, and I think it is better than Progressive in that matter, but I still think it isn't anything amazing or super moving. I don't know. I like it. Maybe I'm just a sucker for slice of life crap like what Alternative is, or maybe it has to do with the emphasis on Kana's relationship with her friends, which gives an insight into the dynamic of this group of characters, which when watching the show makes it easier to flesh out them individually in your mind when you see them interact with different personalities instead of the one-on-one type of thing you get from a romance. The animation here is definitely an upgrade from Progressive, but not much. It has moments where it is more expressive than Progressive, but this animation is still more fitting to a slice-of-life anime and are, at best, above average. It still has the same overarching problem of being pretty flat-looking, and for my money, still falls in line with a lot of the anime that came out in the 2010s, but it's not bad. Overall, I'd say this is at least a bit better than the other show, just barely. It takes far fewer risks than its previous iteration, yet somehow it is more watchable. I mean, it still doesn't capture the same energy of the original, but that comes from the fact that it is trying to be something entirely different. For some reason, it reminded me of Soul Eater Not. Probably because these both FLCL Alternative and Soul Eater Not feel like side stories that are going for the mundane aspects of these characters that are involved in a more highly intense story, with just a touch of the original being present there. Again, not bad, but I don't think the improvements here were enough to justify continuing the story further. And yet they continued the story further. Then, 5 years later, after no one gave a shit, they made another sequel. And guess what? no one gave a shit. Yes, they aired 2 more short series in 2023, FLCL Grunge and FLCL Shoegaze. This time, the shows were even shorter, with each series only being 3 episodes instead of 6. What this means, though, for someone who was just casually watching this instead of me trying to analyze this, is that both of these shows are just gonna feel way too short. And guess what? They both did. Especially Shoegaze, which I'll get to in a bit. First, I want to address the poorly rendered 3D elephant in the room, or FLCL Grunge. Grunge is a bit of a mess. It tries so many different things, but completely misses the mark. If I had to use a baseball analogy here, Progressive was striking out, Alternative was getting walked to first, and Grunge is the batter swinging and somehow hitting themselves in the face. I'm not going to say what it did was all bad. I think it is valiant to take risks, like this show tried to, even if they don't pan out. For that, I'll give it credit where credit is due. At least you tried. Taking risks should be commended, and I commend it for that more than the previous sequels. It may look worse, but its attempt to stick out was at least something, I guess. I don't know, I'm trying to be nice here. I'm not gonna be one of those guys who hammer on every negative thing by starting every review like, what were they thinking? That being said, it still leaves a bit to be desired, especially with the narrative, which it is trying to tell in 3 episodes. Really, 3 episodes is not a lot of time to spend with these characters, but I like the concept that it attempts to do in 3 episodes. Each episode follows a different perspective of the same event. The first with Shinpachi, a sushi apprentice who witnesses gang warfare in front of his restaurant. The second, with Shinari, is him getting wrapped up in the fight that Shinpachi witnesses in the first episode as a result of his gangster brother's death. And the third, with Orniko, who makes the sword that Shinari uses in that fight. The way that it does this gives you an in-depth look at each of these guys and their inner workings, which I think is pretty cool. I just wanted more of it. They could be way more interesting if there was more to their narrative, and we could have seen more if it was given more time and more episodes. I mean, I still want to know more about Shinari and his brother, and how they became the Thing from the Fantastic Four. That's not really explained. I mean, that's just a strange choice. I want to know more about their lives. That goes for all of them too, not just him. There's just not enough to fully grasp who anyone is. It's a little disappointing, and it may have redeemed the show from its pretty bad-looking 3D animation. Okay, so now I'm actually going to talk about the CG stuff. It's bad. We live in a post-Overwatch porn era where 3D animation and clunky models should not be a big problem. 3D animation tools are now pretty common and pretty much free. Stuff like Blender and Unreal Engine have become industry standards at this point, and those tools are practically free to use for most people. You would think that with the ease of access, it would help. But I have a sneaking suspicion that the lack of resources and time is what caused this, and what caused this show to be the way it is. Looking into the production studio, Mont Blanc Pictures, these guys are capable of making good-looking 3D animation and models. Likely, the problem comes from these guys getting put under some pretty harsh time constraints, which ended up making the show look really cheap. Like PS2 in-game cutscenes cheap. There are good bits here and there, but man, does this look like a mess. It just lacks detail in all the wrong ways. I feel like giving these guys a pass, honestly. I know I'm being harsh. Considering this is the first major production for Mont Blanc Pictures, outside of the animated feature they co-produced in 2012, I'll give it a pass. The rest of their work has mostly been commercial, working with music videos and other assorted pieces of promotional material. The blame isn't solely on them. If given the time, I think this could have been better. If they had 3 more episodes, it might have been something interesting. As FLCL Grunge stands right now, it feels unfinished in all aspects, not just the animation. Now back to Shoegaze, to see if they were actually able to pull something interesting and coherent off with 3 short episodes. You know what? I actually like this one. It's weird, obviously. It wouldn't be FLCL without its quirks, but what we got is something unique. I mean, it still suffers because it only has 3 episodes. However, out of all of these sequels I have covered so far, this one's my favorite. I think it's the closest one of these sequels gets to doing its own thing, that at least captures the spirit of the original. Its characters are weird, but have a quirky charm to them. I'm mainly talking about Harumi's character, who has such a blatant absurdity to her that it takes you back. For example, her very first line of the show is this.
Hey, so are you going to drink my pee or aren't you? You listening?
What? What the fuck? FLCL Shoegaze serves as a sort of follow-up to Alternative, where Kana is following two high school students, Harumi and Masaki, as they scale this business tower in order to destroy it. Masaki can see ghosts, and Harumi is psychotic. Kinda straightforward, but I like that. For those basic starting points, these characters get more interesting the further along in the plot we go. I still think there should be more plot here, but 3 episodes is plenty. I'm fine with what we got. I like the development that occurs with these guys, and even for Kana, who's actively involved in this story, with her whole plot line being about growing up and becoming an adult. I like that. For what we see of these guys, I think they're charming, and I think the narrative is charming, and I like that whole direction that it takes Harumi's story in as well. I thought she would just solely be left to the comedic aspect of the show, but her part is way more interesting than anyone else. Masaki is just there, and whether those two elements are intentional or not, I'll let you decide. The animation switches back to the 2D stuff that they were doing on Progressive and Alternative. It's nothing special for the most part, but I do appreciate the effort they put into the conclusion at least. They were able to tell it effectively, and I guess that's enough. Overall, I think this is pretty serviceable as a sequel, not just to the original, but to Alternative, since, as I've gathered, Alternative is the only show of these sequels that people actually like. I mean, I like it too, but for me, this one takes it as my favorite. It still suffers from its short duration and trying to be a sequel, yet it didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. After going through all these sequels, I finally figured out why they were completely forgotten in spite of the original FLCL's legendary status. They are all forgettable. Some have good things about them, but if you were to ask me whether I would recommend this to someone who is looking for more stuff like FLCL after finishing the original for the first time, I would recommend them not going into these sequels. Unless you are a die-hard fan of FLCL, I feel like you won't get a lot out of any of these sequels. I mean, don't get me wrong, the original is great, but I didn't need more of it. I wouldn't say it was an entirely wasted effort to make these sequels. I mean, we still got more music out of the pillows, which is always a plus, but I can't see myself watching any of these shows again. The first set of sequels didn't do enough in 6 episodes, and the other set didn't have 6 episodes to go anywhere interesting. And so, they all kind of suffered. Now, the biggest thing I'm left thinking about after having watched all these shows was the thought process behind each series' naming scheme. Why was Progressive called Progressive? Why was Shoegaze called Shoegaze? I felt like that these shows being named after rock genres had very little to actually do with the show. The only one that actually kind of fits is Grunge, and that's just because the animation kind of looks grungy. Other than that, these shows are just really just some weird celebration / continuation of a show that was just so singular in its vision that any attempt at sequels would have felt tacked on. As such, each of the sequels that I just covered feel tacked on. As it stands, these shows have been largely forgotten, and for good reason. So now, these just exist as a curiosity in anime history. A curiosity which really honestly does not reward the viewer with a good return. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.